Joining us now is Kian Tajbakhsh. He's a visiting professor of international relations at NYU and was a political prisoner in Iran for a number of years. Thanks so much for being here. Here's how Iran has positioned itself ahead of these negotiations. They put out a list of maximalist demands, which the Iranian parliament speaker just doubled down on. They're continuing to control the Strait of Hormuz despite U.S. demands and insistence that reopening it was part of the ceasefire deal. In fact, the new supreme leader even saying they plan to take management of the strait to a new phase. Does it appear to you the regime feels emboldened?
Good morning, and thank you for having me on. Well, yes, it does. I think that all indications show, and it's not unreasonable for a small power like Iran, having what appears to be forced the United States into a ceasefire by the pressure they used on the Straits of Hormuz. They read the situation carefully and cleverly, seeing that President Trump was trying to balance domestic U.S. political considerations and considerations having to do with the international oil market and so forth. And what it looks like is that going into this ceasefire, it was Iran that had found a way to make an end run around the U.S. military action. So from the Iranian point of view, the Iranian regime's point of view and their supporters, this looks very much like a victory. And actually, I have to say that from an American point of view, it's pretty astonishing that the Trump administration and even Vice President Vance has essentially conceded that the Iranians are controlling the Straits of Hormuz. And this is something that was unthinkable 2 months ago. And so it's very clear that the Iranian regime, contrary to what President Trump is saying, there has been no regime change inside Iran. And Iran, yes, it's been battered and maybe lost 70% of its missiles, but it still has 30% of its missiles. And it's enough to, from their point of view, have forced the United States into a ceasefire. So for the regime and their supporters, this certainly looks like a victory.
Realistically, how do you see tomorrow's negotiations shaking out for both sides?
You know, symbolism is very important for the Iranians, as it is for many places inside around the world. One of the symbolism which I would point to, which many people have not, I think, emphasized enough, is the fact that over the last decades, Iran has always managed to insist on its terms for negotiations. First of all, they have never met directly with an American counterpart. They have always gone through mediation, and this is happening again with Pakistan. And secondly, they have always managed to have a much more senior American negotiator meet with a much lower rank Iranian official. And this seems, from the Iranians' point of view, to indicate that either the administration simply doesn't understand where it stands, and it's confused. I mean, if indeed the Speaker of the Parliament is going to be the counterpart to the Vice President of the United States, who is an elected senior official, that would be a great symbolic win for the Iranians. In other words, if they won't even agree to meet directly, I think from an American point of view, Vice President Vance should just walk away. If he doesn't, that would be an enormous symbolic defeat, and it would be very clear that the United States administration is really flailing. I mean, they just don't seem to understand what's going on. One day, President Trump said they're going to, which was, in my view, a repugnant claim to destroy Iranian civilization. Yeah. And the next day, they've conceded 20% of the world's hydrocarbons to Iran. I mean, for the Iranians, this seems that they have the administration kind of on the ropes.
That's for the Iranian government. But what about the Iranian people? What impact has this U.S. military campaign had on citizens of Iran? How do they feel about how this war has unfolded?
Well, thank you for asking that. To understand this, I'll just very simply say that when we think about the Iranian people as a whole, they don't obviously all think in one way. The best way to understand this is to say, look, I estimate about 10 to 15% of the population of Iran, of 92 million, 10 to 15% support this regime. Half of them are true believers, ideological and religious zealots who would fight and die for this regime. The other half of that 10, 15% depend on the regime for their livelihood, so they're going to support them up to a great deal of point. At the other end of the spectrum, we have 30% of the population who are politically passive, you know, like many countries in the world. That leaves 50 to 60% of the population that oppose this regime. They want to live under a free, democratic, secular regime. So, as far as the people are concerned, what we're able to see coming out of Iran are only the voices of those who support the regime, that minority of 10 to 15%. The vast majority who oppose the regime have no opportunity to voice their opposition or to voice their desire for the government to compromise and to change its policies. They were brutally massacred in January when there were protests. Estimates are shockingly 10 to 15, maybe 20,000 people were gunned down, unarmed civilians in just simply 2 days. So those people, I think, which I count myself among them as someone who spent time in prison, as a civil activist, as someone who was a democracy activist, I think that over the next year, the society will have practically no space, no civic space to speak out in terms, because the society is in shock. And not only that, the government feels emboldened not only to take a hard line with the United States, but they're going to take an even harder line with opposition inside Iran. So unfortunately, I think many people inside Iran are very disheartened and feel that they have been either betrayed or they really have no space to articulate their views.